She just takes up space now. That's what my daughter-in-law said, loud enough for my heart to hear, but quiet enough for my son to pretend he didn't. They didn't know I was standing right outside the door. And they didn't know that I paid their mortgage. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 68 years old. I used to be a high school English teacher in a town where you could still leave your porch light on and nobody would take advantage. I raised my son on my own. I buried my husband too young. I worked 2 jobs, paid off every debt I ever had, and never asked for much until the stroke. It came one Tuesday morning while I was folding laundry. It didn't take my mind, thank God, but it stole part of my right side and most of my independence. My doctor said living alone was too risky now, too many stairs, too much silence. If something went wrong, Matthew, my son, didn't hesitate. "Come stay with us, Mom, we've got space. Henry will love having you around." I said yes, not because I wanted to, but because there comes a time when even strong women know how to surrender. At first, things were fine. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, kept things tidy. She smiled mostly. Henry, my grandson, was a joy. 7 years old, all questions and crayons and dinosaur facts. I made myself useful, folded laundry, helped with homework, used my good hand to peel vegetables, read bedtime stories when Rachel was too busy. I tried to take up less space than the coat rack in the hallway, but slowly I began to notice the silence. Conversations paused when I entered the room. Chores I used to do were suddenly already taken care of. The dining table felt tighter, though nothing physically changed. Then one night, I was walking down the hallway to get a glass of water. Lights off, voices low. But I heard them. Rachel's voice sharp, irritated. "She just takes up space now. It's like having another bill in the house." And then, silence. Matthew didn't defend me. Not even a whisper of discomfort. He just let her say it. Let it linger like a stain in the room. The most painful betrayals are never loud. They're made of quiet consent, and the people who say nothing when they should say everything. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hand trembling on the banister, heart pounding like I'd just fallen down the stairs. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I went back to bed, stared at the ceiling, and realized something. I wasn't family, I was furniture, polite to have around, until I took up too much space. The next morning, I watched them like a stranger watches a show they know the ending. Rachel served me coffee in a separate mug, not the matching set. Henry tried to climb into my lap and was told, "Not now, Grandma's tired." Matthew smiled like he always had, only this time it didn't reach his eyes. I looked around the house, the walls, the photos, that kitchen table I helped buy. That mortgage I'd been secretly paying for the past 5 years through a family trust, set up when Matthew's business hit hard times. They didn't know, and that's what hurt the most. They thought they were helping me, but I was the one holding the roof over their heads. I never told them, not out of pride, but because real love doesn't keep score. But that night, I began counting. I thought about how many dinners I skipped so they wouldn't have to cook for me. How many stories I left unfinished so Rachel could have her quiet time. How many payments I made in silence, just to make sure my son never felt shame. And now I was a bill, a burden, a mouth to feed. They thought I didn't hear. But I did, and more than that, I remembered, because something inside me cracked that night, not out of anger, out of clarity. Some heartbreaks don't scream. They just shift the way you see the world, forever. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up writing letters, to my attorney, to the bank, to myself. And in the morning I began planning something I never thought I'd have to do. Leave, quietly, with dignity. Without warning, but not without consequence. She's just one more bill. They thought I didn't hear that. They thought I was asleep, or too old to understand the tone behind closed doors. But silence doesn't make betrayal softer. It makes it sink deeper. I didn't pack in the middle of the night. There was no suitcase by the door, no scribbled note on the kitchen counter. I simply left. At 6 a.m. the house was quiet. Rachel was still sleeping. Matthew had gone on one of his morning runs. I stood at the front door holding the handle, one hand shaky, the other clenched around a single key I wouldn't be needing anymore. I looked back once. The hallway was still dark. The family photo on the wall, me, Matthew, Rachel, and Henry, looked more like a portrait of strangers than a memory. I didn't feel bitter. I felt light. Because leaving wasn't the hard part. The hard part was staying quiet for so long. Years ago, I bought a small cabin on the outskirts of town. I never told anyone. It was meant to be a retirement daydream, a place to write, read, sip coffee in peace. Turns out it became something else, an exit strategy. I arrived just after sunrise, dusty windows, unused furniture, a quiet stillness in the walls, but it was mine. I opened every curtain, let the light in. No one waiting on me, no whispering behind doors, no tension disguised as courtesy, just me. And the sound of my own breathing. I spent the first few hours settling in. I rearranged the books, found old letters from my husband, lit a candle and watched the dust dance in the sunlight. Then I opened my laptop. I logged into the trust account, the one I had set up 5 years ago when Matthew's small business almost folded, and Rachel was 6 months pregnant. They were terrified back then, afraid they'd lose the house, afraid Henry would be born into instability. So I offered to help, quietly, discreetly. I didn't want credit, just security for them. I created the Parker Family Housing Trust and linked it directly to their mortgage account. I scheduled automatic payments on the 1st of each month. They never knew where the money came from. They thought they were managing just fine. But this month would be different, because as I sat at my little table in that tiny cabin, I cancelled the next payment. If I was just one more mouth to feed, then let's see how they do when the table's theirs alone to set. That first day I didn't hear from them, or the next. I imagine they assumed I was at the library or running errands. Rachel probably complained about the laundry not being folded. Matthew probably thought I needed space. But on the 3rd, my phone rang. It was Matthew. He didn't ask where I was. He asked about the mortgage. "Mom, did you ever have anything to do with our home loan? I mean, just curious, something weird happened with the payment this month." I let the silence stretch a beat too long. Then I answered gently, "Yes, I've been paying it every month for 5 years. The line went quiet. I could almost hear his throat close. "You what?" I repeated it. No anger, no drama. 5 years, quietly, because I could, because you needed it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because if you knew, you might have respected me for the wrong reasons." He didn't speak for nearly a minute. And then, Rachel said some things. I didn't mean what she said that night. I cut him off. "You didn't say anything at all, Matthew. That was the problem. He offered to come pick me up, bring me home." He sounded like the boy I raised, panicked, ashamed, still looking for a way to fix things with convenience. But I said no, not cruelly, not as punishment. I simply said, "This cabin doesn't feel like a favor. That's why I'm staying." Later that evening, I brewed tea and stared at the bank login screen again. I saw every transaction, every dollar drained quietly from my account to prop up a home I no longer belonged to, and I didn't regret a single one. But I also knew it was over. Sometimes you don't leave to hurt them. You leave to remember who you were before they made you forget. 4 more days passed. Then Rachel called. Her voice was clipped, forced through pride. "We didn't realize that's what you were doing. I just wanted to say we're grateful." I said thank you, nothing more, because sometimes closure isn't a conversation. It's a calm heart and a clean boundary. She tried to explain how they were trying to refinance. Apparently the bank told them there was a clause in the paperwork tying the trust to partial ownership. I smiled, unseen. "Yes," I said. "I made sure of that." "So we can't refinance without your signature?" "Correct." The silence that followed was one of realization, not frustration. She understood. I wasn't just help. I was part of the foundation. You can push someone aside for years, but when you need their signature to survive, you remember why they mattered. I ended the call and exhaled. The next week, I planted tomatoes in the yard. hung wind chimes, started journaling again. I even joined a small book club at the local library. I was building something, not a new life, but a true one. One where I wasn't a burden. I was simply enough. Henry came to visit a week later with Matthew. He brought a drawing of a house with a garden and wrote in shaky pencil, "This is Grandma's real home." I hugged him tight. He didn't need to know the paperwork. He already understood the truth. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the paperwork. When people say it's just business, they usually mean don't take it personally. But when you've been dismissed in your own family, what's more personal than proving you were never as small as they made you feel? I had been gone for 17 days. No argument, no drama, just vanished, like a breeze they never thanked, until the house got too hot. Matthew and Rachel assumed things would settle eventually. They thought I needed a cooling-off period. They were half right, but the real storm hadn't arrived yet. It came not through me, but through the bank. I got the call on a Tuesday morning around 10:30 a.m. while watering my tomatoes, an unfamiliar number. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Mrs. Parker. I'm with First Stone Mortgage. I'm reaching out regarding a refinancing request on a property you are listed as co-owner of." I wiped the dirt from my hand. "Go on." The voice was polite, processed. "The application submitted by Mr. Matthew Parker and Mrs. Rachel Parker has been flagged due to a shared deed. As per county records and linked trust documentation, we are unable to proceed without your consent and signature." I didn't laugh, but I did smile. It's a quiet, inward kind of smile. "Yes, I'm aware. Can we assume you'll be signing off?" "No, you cannot." Within 3 hours, I got a message from Rachel. This time, no formalities. "You never said you owned part of the house. What exactly did you sign us into?" I waited. Let the silence do the work. Matthew called that evening. His voice wasn't angry. "Just cornered. Mom, can we talk?" "We are." "Okay, look, we didn't realize you had put yourself on the title. That's because you never asked who was paying your bills. Entitlement doesn't ask questions. It just assumes. The answer will serve it." They had finally hit the wall they never thought I was part of. See, I had worked with a very good attorney when I created the Parker Housing Trust. I knew back then that if I were going to carry their debt for them, I needed to protect myself. Not from foreclosure, but from being erased. So I inserted a clause. After 60 consecutive months of payments made through the trust, the beneficiary of the trust, me, would receive automatic co-ownership rights of the property. It would not show on the primary mortgage documents, only through title transfers and trust disclosures. I paid 5 years, to the day, without fail. They had no idea. But now, they needed me. Not emotionally, not as a mother. Legally. Rachel showed up at my cabin 2 days later. Not with food, not with Henry, just herself, and a folder in hand. "You could have told us." "You could have thanked me," she exhaled. "We're trying to fix things. Are you?" I asked. "Or are you just trying to get a better interest rate?" She handed me the folder. Inside was their refinancing paperwork, already filled. All it lacked was my signature. "We can't afford the current rate," she said. "Matthew's contract work has been slow, and with Henry starting school, everything is tight." "So you remembered me." Her eyes dropped. "Look, I know. We said things we shouldn't have. I said things, and I'm sorry. You called me a mouth to feed," she nodded. "Yes, and I regret it. I've regretted it since the moment I realized you were the one keeping our roof intact." I looked at the papers again, then at her. "And if I don't sign?" She hesitated. "We'll manage," she said, trying to sound proud. But her hands were shaking. Dignity is never louder than when it's forced to beg quietly. I didn't answer that day. I told her I'd think about it, and I did, all night. I sat on my porch, blanket across my knees, reading the trust documents I had signed half a decade earlier. I remembered how I felt when I created them, like a parent, doing what was necessary not for credit but for care. But somewhere along the line they mistook silence for insignificance. They thought because I wasn't loud, I wasn't strong. Because I wasn't visible, I wasn't valuable. That was their mistake. The next day, Matthew came. He didn't knock. He stood outside the porch steps like a child waiting for permission to speak. "Come on up," I said. "Just leave your shoes." He sat across from me. No folder, no paperwork. Just him. "We should have asked. We should have cared." I nodded. "You should have seen me. That would have been enough." He looked down at his hands. "If I'm being honest, I think I knew you were helping. I just didn't want to admit how much." "Because it made you feel small?" "Because it made me feel ashamed." We sat in silence. Then I asked, "Do you love that house?" "Yes." "Do you want to raise Henry there?" "Of course." "Then remember this, you don't protect a house with locks, you protect it with gratitude. Gratitude isn't a thank you card, it's how you treat the people you owe everything to, especially when you think they're not watching." I signed the paperwork the next morning, but before handing it back I added one more document, my own. It was a written agreement that should the house be sold in the future, 25% of the equity would be set aside in a trust for Henry's education. Rachel didn't argue. Matthew smiled. Henry would get what they forgot to give me, a future with acknowledgement. Later that week they invited me to dinner, not out of obligation, but with sincerity. I declined, not out of resentment, but because peace is a dish best enjoyed alone. After too many years of crumbs, I didn't say no to punish them. I said no to remind myself that saying yes was once what got me erased. The refinancing went through, they got their new rate, they even sent me a thank you note. But the real moment, the one that meant more than any apology, came from Henry. He drew me a picture, a house, a tree, a big sun. Underneath he wrote, "Grandma. Helped build our house. She never used a hammer, but she held it up anyway. She married up," they said proudly. I smiled, because sometimes the people bragging the loudest have no idea who paid for the roof above their heads. It was a Sunday afternoon when they invited me to dinner. Not just any dinner, a family get-together. Rachel's parents were in town, first time in months. "A casual evening," Matthew had said. I hesitated, but Henry asked me personally. He said he wanted me to be there, so we can all be a family again. So I said yes, for him. The house looked the same. The walls I once helped repaint, the chandelier I quietly covered when Matthew couldn't afford a replacement, the kitchen cabinets I'd chosen from catalogues when Rachel was too overwhelmed to decide, and yet everything felt different, because this time I wasn't walking in as a shadow. I was walking in as someone who had been seen, finally. Rachel greeted me at the door. She smiled. It looked practiced, but I took it anyway. "Glad you could make it. Thanks for the invite." The air was tight, like everyone had agreed to be nice but hadn't agreed on what that meant. Her parents were already seated in the living room, wine glasses in hand. Mr. Wallace was the first to speak. "Well, if it isn't the hero herself," he chuckled like it was a joke I wasn't in on. Mrs. Wallace stood up to hug me, lightly, like you do with someone you're not quite sure how to love. "Rachel's told us some of what you've done," she said, sipping wine. "Some," I replied. "That sounds about right." We moved to the dining table. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh rolls. Comfort food for an uncomfortable reunion. The conversation was polite at first. Weather, Henry's school, Matthew's latest contracts. Then Mr. Wallace leaned back in his chair, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and said the line that made everything pause. "You know, when I see this house, I just think, Rachel really married up." "She did?" I asked gently. "Oh yes," he said. "Look at this place. She's lucky to have landed in a home like this, beautiful neighborhood, custom fixtures. Not bad for a young couple these days." Rachel stiffened. Matthew looked down at his plate. I could have let it go. I could have smiled. Politely swallowed it whole and moved on. But I didn't spend 5 years paying for silence just to go back to it. So I asked, "And what part of this house do you think she built?" He blinked. Mrs. Wallace shifted uncomfortably. "Well, you know, together, of course." "Together," I echoed. "That's a nice word. I like that word." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded document, the final trust record. Didn't plan to bring it, but I also didn't believe in coincidences. I laid it gently on the table. That's the trust that paid this mortgage for 5 years, every single month, while Rachel was starting her business, while Matthew's company struggled. While this family took breath after breath under a roof, I held up with both hands, even when one of them didn't work. The silence was heavier than the meal. I didn't do it for credit. But I won't stand here while you rewrite the C. Story. Rachel looked stunned. Not angry, not defensive, just caught. The worst kind of dishonor isn't being erased. It's being remembered as something you never were, a footnote in a story you built line by line. Mrs. Wallace finally spoke. We didn't know. That's the thing about privilege, I said. It rarely bothers to ask where the staircase came from, just celebrates reaching the top. After dinner, Henry took my hand and walked me to the garden. Are you mad at them? He asked. No, I said, but they didn't say thank you. That's okay, I didn't do it for that. He paused, then whispered, I would have said it. I squeezed his hand. And you just did. When I got home that night, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't want applause, I just felt steady, like a house finally resting on the foundation it always had. I looked at the framed photo on my bookshelf, my late husband, holding Matthew, as a baby. We raised them with love, I said to the picture, but sometimes we have to remind them how they were carried. Gratitude is easy at the dinner table, but real respect shows up when everything else falls apart. 2 days passed after that dinner, no calls, no texts, just quiet. But it wasn't the cold silence I had grown used to in that house. This time, it was different, heavier, thoughtful, maybe even a little embarrassed. Then on Thursday afternoon, I got a knock at the door, not a phone call, not a text, a knock. And when I opened the door, it was Rachel, no makeup. Hair tied back, no folder in hand, no pre-rehearsed lines, just her, nervous, alone. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. Wasn't expecting you. I know. She hesitated, looked past me into the quiet cabin, the garden, the soft music from the radio. It's peaceful here. It is. Another pause, then she said it. I want to offer you your room back. I blinked. Excuse me. You don't belong in a separate house. Not after everything. You belong with family. I studied her face. Not for lies, but for sincerity. And to my surprise, I found it. Why now? I asked gently. She looked down, because I realized I was building a life on something I didn't value until it almost left for good. Sometimes we don't recognize the walls, holding us up until they start walking away. I didn't say yes, I didn't say no. I told her I'd think about it. And I did all night. I paced the cabin, touched every photo, ran my fingers over the bookshelf, looked at my plants like they were old friends I might be saying goodbye to. Part of me wanted to stay. Another part knew that sometimes returning is the hardest thing a person can do, not because they're angry, but because they've finally learned peace. But before I could decide, something happened that none of us expected. It was 2:14 a.m. The phone rang. I answered instantly, my heart already racing before I even said hello. It was Matthew. Mom, it's Rachel. She collapsed. Ambulance just took her. They think it's a ruptured appendix. I'm with Henry. I don't know what to do. He sounded like a boy again, not a husband, not a father, just a scared child needing his mother. Where are you? County. General. I'm on my way. I was in the car within minutes, didn't even change clothes, didn't comb my hair. When life gets real, you stop caring about how you look and start caring about who's hurting. I found him in the waiting room, hunched over with Henry asleep in his lap. He looked up, and when he saw me, something in him cracked. They're prepping her for emergency surgery. Okay, I said calmly. You're not alone. I don't know how to comfort Henry. I sat beside him, took my grandson's hand, rubbed his back like I used to do when he scraped his knees. We'll get through this, I whispered. Thank you, Matthew said, eyes wet, for coming. I didn't say you're welcome. Some moments don't need that. Family isn't built on blood. It's built on who shows up when everything else breaks. Surgery went well. Rachel stayed in recovery for a few days. Matthew juggled work, Henry bills, and for the first time in years, he truly struggled. He came by my cabin the next week, shoulders slumped, and asked for help. Not money, not paperwork. Help. Could you stay with Henry during the week? I want to be there for Rachel at the hospital. I nodded. Of course, no hesitation. Not because I owed them, because I knew what it felt like to be left behind, and I wouldn't pass that feeling forward. Henry and I spent those days building Lego cities and talking about planets. One night he asked, "Grandma, when people get sick, how do you know they'll come back?" I looked at him and smiled. "You don't. That's why you hold their hand as long as you can, just in case they do." Rachel returned home after 10 days. She was pale, sore, quiet, but different. She thanked me. Not just for Henry. Not just for showing up, but for everything, and this time it wasn't awkward, it wasn't forced, it was real. Respect isn't earned all at once. Sometimes it arrives quietly. After everything else has fallen apart, they offered again for me to move back in, this time with new terms, my own space, my own key, and most importantly, my voice. I didn't give an answer right away, because after so many years of being forgotten, sometimes the power lies in choosing where and when you return. They gave me back my room. I gave them back the truth. I wasn't moving into their home. They were finally acknowledging it was mine too. It had been nearly 2 months since the night Rachel collapsed. Things had changed, on the surface at least. Rachel was more careful with her words. Matthew made more eye contact. Henry smiled wider, and then one afternoon they came to the cabin, all 3 of them. Rachel was still healing but strong enough to walk again. She held Henry's hand. Matthew carried a small suitcase. "We were thinking," Rachel said, "if you're ready, we'd like you to come home." That word, home, it hit different now. I nodded slowly. "On one condition," I said. "I'm not your guest, I'm not your burden, and I'm not just someone who helps with the kid." They nodded. Matthew spoke first. "Your family. You always were. We just didn't act like it. You treated me like background noise," I said. "And now you're offering me a seat at the table again. I'm not angry, but I've learned to protect my peace. If I come back, I do it as a woman with a name, not as an afterthought." Rachel reached into her purse and handed me a new key. "This is yours. And not just to the house, but to every room, every conversation, every decision. For the first time in years." I believed her. Forgiveness isn't a welcome mat, it's a doorframe with a lock, opened only for those who remember why it was ever closed. So I moved back in. Same room, same hallway. But everything felt different. The couch wasn't just for them anymore. The kitchen wasn't off limits, and the laundry room didn't whisper that I was in the way. Still, old habits die hard. One morning I heard Rachel say, "Don't worry, Mum, you don't have to help with dinner tonight." I stopped. Mid-step turned slowly. "I'm not here to be helped or hidden. I make dinner because I want to be part of it. Don't take that from me." She nodded. Quiet, embarrassed. "You're right. I'm sorry." We cooked together that night, for the first time ever. One evening we had guests. Matthew's boss and his wife. Big job opportunity, promotion on the table. Rachel set the table perfectly. Henry wore a tie. I brought out a pie. The boss's wife smiled. "You must be Evelyn. I've heard so much about you." I smiled back. "All true, I hope." Rachel. "Says you've been staying with them for a while. Must be nice to have a place to land." I set down the pie slowly. "I didn't land here. I helped build this place." "Oh?" Rachel jumped in. "My mother-in-law's actually the reason we still live here. We'd have lost the house years ago without her support." I looked over at her, and in that moment, I saw it. Not pity, not guilt, pride. Sometimes the most powerful seat at the table is the one no one expected you to claim. Later that night, after the guests left, Rachel came to my room. She stood in the doorway, not like a warden, like a daughter. "Thank you for today and for coming back." "Thank you," I said, "for finally seeing me." We sat down on the bed and she said, "I used to think letting someone help me was weakness, but now I know ignoring that help, that was the real weakness." We sat in silence for a long time. That kind of silence that doesn't weigh on you, it holds you. The next morning I found a note on my dresser from Rachel. It read, "You paid for the roof. Now let us repay you, with space, respect, and a place you never have to ask for again." Redemption isn't earned all at once. Sometimes it's carved out one day at a time. with smaller mistakes and bigger honesty. I'm not just living here now, I belong here. I decorate the guest bathroom. I plant flowers out front. I help Henry with school projects and take up space without apologizing for it, because this time I didn't come back to be tolerated. I came back to be home. She just kind of hovers, doesn't she? I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I did. And I smiled, and because people forget who makes the celebration possible until the check comes due. It was Henry's 8th birthday. Rachel had gone all out. Balloons, catering, rented tables, the whole 9 yards. She wanted this to be his best birthday yet, especially after the scare with her health. The house was buzzing. Kids running wild. Adults clutching wine glasses and pretending not to care who brought what. Matthew handled the grill. Rachel managed decorations and chaos with a smile tight enough to crack. And me, I floated. Not because I didn't belong, but because no one really. I knew where to place me. I brought Henry's gift out early. A hand-carved wooden telescope stand with his name etched along the side. He'd been talking about stars and constellations for months, and I wanted him to feel seen. "This is so cool," he yelled, hugging me so hard I nearly lost my balance. Rachel smiled, genuinely. "He's going to remember that forever," she whispered. "That's the idea." I went back inside to bring out the birthday cake, custom-made, star-themed, vanilla with chocolate layers, just how Henry liked it. As I set it on the table, I heard it. 2 women near the drink cooler. Friends. Of Rachel's, I assumed, their voices low but not low enough. Is that her mother or his? His, I think. She lives with them now, kind of hovers, doesn't she? A pause, a sip of wine. Well, every family has one. Every family has one. One what? One burden? One leftover? One obligation they don't know what to do with? I didn't say anything. Just straightened the cake. Lit the candles. Smiled when everyone came out singing. Because some responses don't need words. They need presence. After the cake, people wandered, talked, and took pictures. That's when Rachel came up beside me. I heard what they said. "It's all right," I said. "I've been called worse." "It's not all right. You bought the cake, paid for the telescope, set up half the backyard this morning. This party wouldn't even be happening without you." I looked at her. Then, "Maybe next time let them know." She nodded, and for once I knew she would. Later that evening, when most of the guests had left and the balloons were starting to sag, I found Henry sitting at the edge of the porch, legs dangling. "Good party?" I asked. "Best one ever," he said. "Even with all the noise, the best part wasn't the party." I raised an eyebrow. "No? It was when you hugged me after I opened the telescope. I think stars feel like that. Sometimes the quietest moment in the room is the one that lasts the longest in someone's memory." That night, as we were cleaning up, Rachel surprised me again. She called everyone into the kitchen, just the immediate family. Matthew looked confused. Henry was holding a leftover balloon. Rachel cleared her throat. "I want to say something," she began. "About today, and about Evelyn." She looked at me. "I haven't always been fair to you. I haven't always known how to make space. And I definitely haven't thanked you properly for everything you've done, and continue to do, not just for Henry, but for this entire house." She turned to Matthew. "This party, we couldn't have pulled it off without her, literally. She paid for half of it. She handled the cake. She made Henry's favorite gift." Then she looked at Henry. "Grandma isn't just part of this house, she's part of what makes it strong." I didn't cry, I didn't need to, but I did feel something open in my chest. That had been shut for too long. Validation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper in front of the right people. And that's enough. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The string lights were still glowing. The wind was soft. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Not pride, not victory. Place. Wasn't extra. I wasn't decoration. I wasn't a backup plan. I was a part of the structure. And now they knew it too. "It's been years," she said. "Should her name still be on the deed?" That's when I got up, walked to my drawer, and brought back a copy of the deed with my name written in ink they couldn't erase. It had been 6 months since I moved back in. 6 months of shared dinners, real conversations, and the kind of slow healing that doesn't look dramatic, just quietly permanent, and just when I thought I'd earned back the room I never should have had to vacate. The conversation came, not from Matthew, not from Rachel, but from her sister. It was a Sunday brunch, soft eggs, jazz music, Henry flipping pancakes like a pro. Rachel's sister, Laura, had come down from Chicago. She was friendly, stylish, sharp-tongued, and spoke with the tone of someone who meant well but assumed too much. Over coffee, I heard her say, "It's nice of you guys to take Evelyn in again, but honestly, is her name still on the deed? I mean, that made sense during the refinancing." Drama, but now? Rachel didn't answer. She just looked down at her cup. Matthew said nothing at all. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. People don't always intend to erase you. Sometimes they just get used to you being silent while they re-edit the story. I stood up, didn't raise my voice, didn't ask permission. I walked to the hall closet, opened the small drawer with my name on it, and took out the envelope, the one I'd never needed. Until now. I came back to the table, placed it in front. "Dear Laura, you're wondering if my name is still on the house. You could have just asked me." She blinked. I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought that I served my purpose and should fade politely into the background. Silence. I looked at Rachel. Then Matthew. Neither met my eyes. "Go ahead," I said. "Open it." Inside was a notarized copy of the deed, my name clearly listed as co-owner. Next to it was a letter from the trust attorney. When I signed onto this house, I didn't ask for it. I paid for it. I protected it. When the bank wanted their money, it wasn't Laura who showed up. It wasn't even you, Rachel. It was me. Rachel looked up. Her voice was soft. "I'm sorry. I should have spoken up." I nodded. "Yes. You should have." Laura stood, adjusting her coat. "I was just curious, no offense meant." "None taken," I replied. "But curiosity carries a cost, and you just paid it in dignity." She didn't say goodbye, just left. Later that evening, Matthew knocked on my door. "Mom, come in." He sat on the edge of the bed where I was knitting. We messed that up. "Again," I smiled. "I've lived long enough to know that not all respect is constant. Some people have to re-earn it every few months." "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you planning to stay forever?" I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to make sure he was ready for the truth. "I'm not here because I have to be. I'm here because I choose to be. But the day you or Rachel start treating me like I'm temporary again, I'll leave. And I won't look back. Love asks for patience, respect asks for presence, but dignity draws a line and dares you to cross it." The next morning I found a note on my door. Not from Matthew, not from Rachel, from Henry. "Grandma, if they forget, I won't. You live here, not just in the house, in my room, in my stars, in my stories. Love, Henry." I folded the note carefully and placed it inside the same envelope that once held the deed, because some names aren't written on paper. They're carved into memory, and mine was finally safe there. "We want to include you in the will," Rachel said gently. I smiled, because I had already written a document of my own, one they'd never expected, but would never forget. It came up quietly, over tea. Rachel sat across from me in the kitchen. Her tone was softer now, her words no longer measured by defensiveness, but by something closer to care. "Matthew and we've been working on some legal things. The will, the house, custody plans in case anything ever happens." I nodded. I'd been a mother long enough to know what came next. "We want to include you in it," she said. "Officially." She looked down at her tea. "Not because we owe you, but because we finally get it." For a moment, I just let the silence sit between us. It wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Then I said, "Thank you, that means more than you know." But what I didn't say was this. They were too late, not in a bitter way, not in a way meant to punish, but in a way that reminded me of something I'd learned the hard way. If you wait for people to protect your legacy, you'll die forgotten. If you build it yourself, you live in it, forever. The truth was I'd already written my own will, months ago after I moved into the cabin, after the mortgage payments stopped. after the silence proved louder than any apology. It wasn't written out of spite, it was written out of clarity. And tonight, I decided they were ready to see it. I walked to my dresser, opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the envelope, thicker than the others. Heavier, too. Rachel watched me slide it across the table. "This is my will," I said. "Signed, notarized, filed." Her brows lifted. "You've had this since the week I left your house the first time." She touched the envelope like it might burn her. "May I read it?" Of course. Inside were 5 pages. The first 2 covered the usual things: accounts, possessions, burial preferences. Simple, no fuss, no piano version of Ave Maria, please. But the last 3 pages were what left her quiet, because in them I had written gifts, but not of money, of meaning. To Matthew, I left the trust history, the entire record of 5 years of payments I made on the house, along with a handwritten letter titled, "When You're Ready to Understand." To Rachel, I left a collection of journals, my personal writings from the time I lived in their home, both the painful entries and the ones where I began to forgive her. To Henry, I left everything else. The cabin, the garden, the telescope, the storybooks, the deed to a house they didn't even know I owned in my hometown. "Why him?" Rachel asked, blinking back tears. "Because he saw me before you did. Because he loved me without condition, and because I trust him to carry what I built, without forgetting who helped him stand." She wiped her cheek. "That's fair. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like peace just handed to the right hands." Later that night, Matthew came home. Rachel told him everything. He didn't storm into the kitchen, didn't argue, didn't offer edits. Instead, he walked outside, sat beside me on the porch, and just breathed. "I read it," he said. "And I don't deserve the letter you wrote me. Maybe not yet, but one day you might. You still have time to change it, you know. Put yourself in ours. Let us take care of you." I smiled. "I'm not leaving things behind so someone takes care of me. I'm leaving them behind so no one erases me. When people rewrite your story, they usually start with your absence. So I made sure mine had footnotes." We sat in silence again, the same porch we'd ignored each other on for years, now filled with words we finally had the courage to say. He reached into his coat and handed me a folded piece of paper. I made something too. It was a new deed, rewritten, updated, listing me as a permanent owner with veto rights over any future sale. "This isn't symbolic," he said. "It's legal. It's yours." I held it like a fragile gift. "Then I guess we're finally speaking the same language. The most powerful stories aren't told. They're signed in ink and backed by silence that chose to wait." She wasn't rich, someone once said. But when I was gone, it wasn't the money they remembered. It was the way I made them feel whole when the walls around them were falling apart. It happened quietly. One morning, I couldn't quite feel my left leg. By noon, my words were a little slower. By evening, I was in a hospital bed, tubes in my arm, the beep of machines replacing the soft ticking of my kitchen clock. I knew what it was, a second stroke, not as severe as the first, but this one came with a whisper instead of a bang. Matthew and Rachel were there. They came quickly, faster than I expected. Rachel held my hand. Matthew adjusted my blanket like it might stop the inevitable. "You're going to be okay," he said. I didn't correct him. Some words are more for the speaker than the listener. Henry came in later, after school. He looked taller than he had the day before, or maybe I just felt smaller. He didn't say anything right away, just walked over, set his backpack down and took my hand. "You don't have to talk," he whispered. "I already know. I spent 3 days in that bed. I couldn't move much, couldn't speak full sentences. But I could hear. And that was enough. I heard Rachel call the lawyer. He assured her everything Evelyn owned was already accounted for, down to the last plant in her garden. I heard Matthew say he didn't care about the paperwork, he just wanted one more conversation, and I heard Henry reading, not out loud, to himself, sitting in the corner reading one of my old journals like it held a map to who he was meant to become. Legacy doesn't live in the things you leave behind. It lives in the questions they ask. When you're no longer answering. They released me after a week. Rachel wanted me to move back into their bedroom downstairs. Matthew offered to hire someone part-time. I chose something else. I went back to the cabin, the place where I once found silence, and turned it into home. Rachel protested at first, but she didn't fight me. Matthew drove me himself. He walked me inside, set my bag down, and said quietly, "We'll be here. When you need us, every day if you want." "I know," I whispered. For the next 2 months I lived with both clarity and slowness. My speech returned piece by piece, some days better than others, but I never felt like I was disappearing. Henry came every Saturday, sometimes with schoolwork, sometimes with questions, sometimes just to sit. One day I asked him, slowly, carefully, "Why do you come?" He smiled. "Because you're the only one who ever taught me that silence isn't empty." Then one Thursday I didn't wake up. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft, peaceful, the kind of ending I'd always hoped for. Not alone, not afraid, just complete. When people say someone passed away peacefully, they rarely explain why. For me, it was because I'd said everything I needed to say without ever raising my voice. The funeral was simple, as I requested. No organ music, no overblown eulogies, just soft laughter, old photos, and the scent of lavender I used to keep in my dresser. Henry stood up to speak. No notes. No fear. My grandma wasn't rich. She didn't leave behind jewels or mansions. She left me a telescope. And a lesson. When people stop seeing your worth, don't yell. Just let the silence show them what they missed. She didn't teach me how to make money. She taught me how to matter, Rachel cried. Matthew held her hand. Neither spoke, because in that moment, Evelyn Parker was louder in her absence than most people are in a room. Later, they found a letter. It was tucked inside the same drawer that once held the trust documents. On the front, written in Evelyn's clean, looping script, "For when I'm gone, but not forgotten." Inside. "If you're reading this, I'm finally at peace. If you're crying, that's okay. Just don't forget to laugh after. Don't fight over the house. I already told the lawyer what to do. Don't forget the garden. That soil knows my stories. And please, don't try to make me a saint. I made plenty of mistakes, but I loved you. Loudly, in silence, constantly, even when I was fading. And I hope, when you feel small, you remember. You came from someone who never stopped being big, even when the world tried to shrink her." Rachel framed the letter. Matthew read it once a week, and Henry. He planted a tree in the backyard of the house they now fully owned. A small plaque underneath it reads, "She wasn't just part of this house. She was the reason it stood." Some women shout, some women leave, some women stay silent and change everything.